This is Skip 101, brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Did you play any sports at all when you were a kid?
Big time.
Big time,
We
such
had
as?
we had a lot of boys on our street,
Yeah,
so you can always get a football game. You can
you
always get
can.
a baseball game, basketball game. We was into everything under the sun: dirt bikes, skateboards, go karts. Um, it was always something to do, and you know, in the neighborhood, you got your gangbang streets,
Yeah,
and you got your sports streets. And we was a
okay.
sports street. So it was a lot, it was a lot of guys just showing what they can do in sports.
Okay, so it was Van Wyck Street, right? That was a sports street.
Yep.
And
Van
and what did you excel in of those three big sports? What was your favorite, or what were you best at?
Football and basketball.
Okay.
Those were my two favorite. And I could definitely hold my own, within my age group, of course, on
Yeah.
Van Wyck. And I played a little Pop Warner for Hawthorne, and a little organized basketball for the Inglewood YMCA.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you, the point guard, shooting guard? What was your forte?
Point guard, but I was a guard that can get rebounds too. So
Yeah.
I definitely would love to go in there and bang. I used to have to play with my brother. He's 9 years older than me, so
Yeah.
you can imagine his friends and me. Me having to bang in there back in the
Yeah.
'80s when everybody wanted to be Daryl Dawkins, wanted to
Yeah.
be Moses
Exactly.
Malone.
Yeah.
I really learned how to bang in there with the big boys and come up with a couple of boards here and there.
So did that go up through ninth grade? Like how far did you go, even in the YMCA league?
Um, I think I stopped playing about 14.
Yeah.
Um, when I went to high school, I played football in high school for 1 year, and then met Dr. Dre,
Yeah.
fell in love with hip hop, and
Yep.
the football field keeps you away from the studio, so I chose the studio life over the gridiron.
Okay. And you played that 1 year. Would that have been ninth or 10th grade in high
10th
school?
grade.
10th
10th grade.
grade.
Football. I played fullback and I played outside linebacker.
Really?
Yeah.
And could you bang away as a fullback between the tackles?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
definitely could clear it out for my guy, for my tailback.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I was fast too. At a certain point, I started to do kickoff returns and punt
Did
returns.
you? Okay. And at that age, ninth grade, 10th grade, what size were you?
I was still little, I was still,
Yeah.
probably maybe 5'6",
Okay.
maybe 170 pounds, maybe.
Okay.
You know,
All right.
yeah.
And was that in your hood, or because at some point you started bussing out to Taft, right?
Yeah, I played at Taft.
You did. Wow.
I actually played at
God.
Taft for a year. Yeah.
Man, the buses have to wait late, right, to take
Buses
you
have to
home?
wait late. After practice, just it's dark by the time you
I would
come
say.
home. So,
Yeah.
yeah, football practice, keep you late, especially on the games Friday nights. I remember, walking home with my equipment. It's almost 11 o'clock, eleven
Yeah.
thirty at night.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Walking from the bus stop, beat up from the game, dirty with my equipment.
I never could get why they would bus you so far, because for anybody who knows Los Angeles, from where you are, it's not that far from like LAX, right? It's just kind of
Mhm.
in that area.
Yeah.
And to bus, I assume you just had to take the 405 back and forth because there's no other way to do it, and to go
Well,
completely up over the hill down into the valley to Woodland Hills to Taft High School. Man, it's far. That could take, I don't know, an hour and a half on a bad day, right?
Yeah, I would have to get up. I would have to get to the bus stop by about 6:30. You know,
Okay.
if you come to the bus stop later than 6:30, you was definitely gonna miss it, and that would get us to school. You know, I get to school 7:30, 7:40. Bell ring at 8:10, and we in there. So it was a long ride. It was really long when you missed the bus
I'd
and you had
say.
to take the RTD.
Oh God.
If you had to take the regular
Yeah,
public transportation, it would take you 2.5 hours
I would think
for you
so.
to get to school. Yeah.
Yeah. And why was it? What caused this? That long busing?
Well, I went to school in the neighborhood elementary, and then one day I came home and my mother had talked to some of the other neighbor, some of my friends' mothers on the block, and they had got a letter about busing, kids out of the neighborhood to, a different experience. And they
Huh.
got together and decided our fate that we was all gonna get bused instead of going to, my school would have been Henry Clay right
Yeah.
there on Western. So, we ended up, getting bused. Seventh grade. Seventh grade turned into the eighth grade. We end up, meeting friends out there, having a great time going to
Yeah.
school, and
No, it's great out there.
then we
Yeah.
wanted to be bused. We wanted to go out there after a while, um, because all of our friends and everything we had established was at those schools. So that's how it went
So
down.
tell me how rough was your actual neighborhood, your Westmont area, because it had a reputation for being like the highest murder rate I think in LA County for a while. I don't know if that still stands, but that's what I always read about exactly where you grew up.
Yeah, it was very unpredictable.
Yeah.
Some days it'd be cool, calm, and collected. Some days it'd be, a lot of drama. I just think, you had to be able to hold your own. And it was a neighborhood that if you didn't show that you was tough,
Yeah.
you could really get devoured.
Okay.
Uh, had my share of fist fights growing up, establishing a pecking order, so to speak, in your
Yep.
neighborhood.
Yep.
And, you know, made decisions. It was all kind of people on our block, from working men, to men that wasn't doing the right thing, to sports guys, to guys that was chasing girls, guys that was slinging a little dope, and then guys that was gang banging. Um, and you made a choice on which way you wanted to go. And
Yep.
so I was happy that in the 80s, it's a new music going around called hip hop
Yep.
that not everybody knew how to do or knew how to even be a part of it. Most people were just fans. And I was lucky that my neighbor was a guy named Sir Jinx, who is Dr. Dre's cousin.
Oh.
And so he was he had cardboard, he was doing head spins and break dancing and DJing and doing all that stuff, graffiti,
Yep.
everything in hip hop he would do. And I was intrigued when some of my other friends thought it was just a waste of time.
Hmm.
And I would go hang out, and I started to become a b-boy. I started to love it just as much, and I wanted to do it. I started rapping at 14.
Yep. And did you feel like you were instantly good at it, like gifted at it? Could you feel that?
I knew I was a good writer
Yeah.
at that time. I was young. Um, the reason I had so much confidence as a writer is because my fifth grade teacher, a lady named Miss Prentice,
Huh.
she would tell us, write down what you did for summer vacation, this, that, and the other. And she was so impressed with what I wrote that she showed it to the principal.
Really?
Principal put it in a little newsletter, gave me a lot of confidence. And then when
Yeah.
I got to the sixth grade, they asked me to do a speech for the sixth grade class.
Huh.
And that was a real confidence booster because I wrote my speech and then was able to stand and deliver, and my class loved it. And
Hmm.
so that gave me the confidence that I could write.
Yeah.
But as far as rap, I wasn't that good. I needed a lot of practice and practice every day, just trying to get better and better.
How much of those long bus rides did you ride on the bus?
I wrote everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote everywhere on the bus, in class. You know what I mean? After practice, it was like to me, it was great to be able to be creative. Even in the middle of school or in the middle of a long ride, to still take time and be creative when other people was bored to death. They was going to sleep. They was doing all kind of other things,
Yeah.
and it was either writing rhymes or doing homework, one or the other.
Just curious, that fifth grade teacher, black or white?
Black teacher,
Good.
short
Good for
older
her.
teacher
Yeah.
named Miss Prentice, and she was very strict. But if you did what you were supposed to do, and if you showed that you was into the lessons, she was the sweetest lady in the world. So,
Exactly. Well,
uh,
God bless her because I
yes,
think she inspired you. It sounds like it.
without a doubt,
Yeah.
she inspired me in a lot of different ways. And that's why I still remember. You remember the teachers' names when they made an
You
impact.
do. Yeah. Okay. Where were your parents in all this? Were they encouraging at all?
Totally encouraging. Anything that kept me off the streets, kept me out of juvenile hall.
Yeah.
Just they was always positive, and it wasn't just with music. It was, when I wanted to play sports, or when I wanted to, do other things other than just what the neighborhood had to offer.
Yeah.
They were always, behind me, and my siblings as well. I'm the youngest, so I had seen a lot of the mistakes they made growing
Yeah.
up, and was able to sidestep a lot of that.
And by the way, you had a half sister who got killed. What happened?
Yeah, sister named Beverly,
Hmm.
and she was killed by her husband.
Oh gosh.
Um, Her husband, they were staying. They had a nice apartment, and he had got robbed and actually kidnapped. So they kind of moved out that same day and went to go live with her mother,
Hmm.
and they lived there for months, and he couldn't get back on his feet, and it started to wear on him.
Yep.
Um, he wanted to be a police officer, and
God.
I think he failed the academy or
Yeah.
whatever, and so it just sent
Hmm.
him into this deep depression. And then my sister didn't want him no more because he just turned into a different man.
Yep.
So that started problems, and he didn't want to let her go.
Man.
And so he murdered her when I was 12 years old.
How did it impact you? Did it shake you up?
Yeah, I was a
Yep.
different person
Hmm.
from that day on. Different kid. Life was not the same.
Hmm.
It didn't seem as bright
Yeah. Exactly.
to that, and so I knew life was serious, so I took things more serious probably than my peers who didn't have to deal with that.
So, was there any turning point moment when you could, that north south moment when you were tempted to do this or that? I don't know, gangbang or drugs or whatever it was. Do you remember any turning point moment where you went north instead of south?
Um, yeah, I mean it was more of a circumstance that I was getting myself into that didn't happen, and then in retrospect, I realized that that was a blessing.
Hmm.
Um, Youngster that I knew that I went to school with, he started to really get high on dope, and he beat my mother out of some money
Mm.
with a cockamamie story, about being my friend and this,
Yeah.
that, that. And I was so hot. I'm 17, 16 years old.
Yeah.
And my friend Greenfield had just, back then you can buy shotguns from Big Five or Western Surplus,
Yeah.
one of those
Yeah.
surplus type stores.
Mm-hmm.
I just bought a Mossberg shotgun. And I was so mad. I was like, man, get it and let's go. And
Mm.
and we went over to the dude's house and knocked on the door. And if he would have came out, I think I'd have shot him.
Okay.
But he didn't come out. He wasn't there. And in retrospect, I was thinking like, my life could have been over. I'm
Yeah.
glad he
Good.
wasn't
Mm.
there. You talk tough, but ultimately I was glad he wasn't there.
Mm.
And, my life would have been different if he was, because I had my mind made up.
Did you ever see him again after
Never
that?
seen him again. Never
Yeah.
seen him.
Okay. Well, God or somebody up there was good because
Yeah.
that would have changed things.
It would have totally, derailed my whole life.
Okay. So before we get to Straight Outta Compton, the other move that you made that always intrigued me the most was you sort of dabbled with NWA for a while, and you guys did this and that and this and that. Nothing really took off or caught hold, and you picked up and went to Phoenix and got an architectural design degree, right? You just picked up and went.
Yeah, it was more of a certificate, it was a
Okay.
1 year trade school.
All right, but you did that.
Yeah, you know.
That's guts, man. I mean that's having the perspective of, hey, I don't know if this is ever going to work. It's fun, but at some point you got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And you went and did that. You went to Phoenix, Arizona, and did that.
Yeah, what we was doing, the music we were doing was so radical and
Yeah,
underground.
yeah,
I just never knew it was gonna ever see the light of day. Nobody did.
absolutely.
We thought this was just gonna be music that the very hardcore
I
listen
got it.
to,
Yeah,
and it wouldn't, go past that.
yeah,
And so I wanted to have something to fall back on. We was West Coast rappers, so it wasn't no sample size of
no,
West Coast rappers taking it all the way to the top.
yeah,
Our only example was Ice-T, and he was very known, and he was deep into East Coast hip hop culture.
yeah,
So he knew Big Daddy Kane, he knew KRS One, he knew all the rappers
yeah,
that we were fans of, and then he became, the biggest artist out of the West Coast when we were still trying to figure it out. So it was no way for me to know that NWA was gonna explode. So I wanted to fall back on. I went to Phoenix, Arizona for a year. Summer 80, no, fall of 87 to fall of 88.
okay.
And I'm glad I did, man. I met some incredible people. Um, I don't think some of the songs that made it on Straight Outta Compton would have been there if I didn't go to school.